Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Q&A panel session on content and device security in the video streaming industry. My name is Michael Liu with ARM. So before I introduce our panelists, I would like to mention a few housekeeping topics. So today's session will be recorded and it will be available on ARM's DevSummit site within 24 hours. We very much welcome your comment and questions, so please type any of your questions into the chat box and we'll put them to the panelists. And if you got any questions about our code of conduct, please see the FAQ on ARM's DevSummit site. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists. I'll start with Dianne Marsh from Netflix. Hi, Dianne. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Michael. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here. I, as you know, lead the device and content security team at Netflix, and I had the great privilege to be able to do a keynote yesterday for the DevSummit that really focused on the topic for our conversation today around the challenges of building for a multi-tenant world. And I'm really excited about being able to bring everyone together to continue the conversation in a more interactive way that we could actually do in a recorded session. So specifically, I just want to, for the people who may not have attended the session, just bring forward some of the ideas about that I launched in that session around challenges that we face in hybrid OTT and CAS, challenges that we face from bringing together multiple providers on the same hardware, and really thinking about the device security that we need to build in from the ground up for these devices that live for a very long time in our ecosystem. And so I think what you'll hear today from all of the panelists are multiple views from different angles about how we can do this together and how we really need all of you in the audience to join us in figuring out how to solve this problem, because none of us, and the real impetus for my talk was that none of us has all of the context that we need to do this on our own. So that's my call to action. Thank you for inviting me here, and I'm looking forward to the other panelists.
Thank you, Dianne. So next, I would like to introduce Scott Kelly from Netflix. So Scott, do you want to just talk about what you do at Netflix, and do you want to add a bit more to what Dianne was saying?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I lead the device partner security team at Netflix, and we engage with many partners in the ecosystem trying to deal with some of these issues Dianne's talking about. We work with ARM, with SOC vendors that take ARM IP, well-known consumer electronics OEMs, set-top box vendors and manufacturers, conditional access vendors, TV operators, up and down the stack in the ecosystem. And now we're beginning to engage with mobile vendors as well. Our approach at Netflix to security has been a little unusual in that we've really leaned into collaboration with the ecosystem rather than trying to just enforce rigorous security requirements. So we're hoping that this conversation today will help to encourage others to join us and contribute to this.
Thank you, Scott. So can I introduce now Mark Arana from the Walt Disney Studios. Do you want to tell the attendees a bit more about what you do and what you're focusing on at the moment, Mark?
Sure, thank you, Michael, and thank you for also hosting this, Dianne. Mark Arana with the Walt Disney Studios. So I'm not part of the Disney Plus organization or the Hulu organization. I sit in the studios proper, and I'm in charge of the various distribution technology platforms that studios may engage in. So that is everything from content protection and all the distribution deals that Disney does with all of outside partners and distribution platforms, whether it be cable or digital or broadcast over the air, whatever formats, including physical, which is still a business for us. And then also piracy intelligence, understanding behavior for why people pirate content, not the enforcement legal side, but really trying to understand the root of the behavior practices for piracy. And that is in addition to some other work around emerging formats and just video platforms in general. So we're all very knowledgeable about the various technologies that are out there that can be used both for internal and external purposes.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. And would like to introduce Andy Lucas from Universal Pictures. Andy, do you want to introduce yourself and also what you do?
Yeah, thanks very much, Michael, and good to see everyone. It's quite similar to what Mark does at Disney, actually. I do for Universal. So I head up global distribution technology for Universal Pictures, focusing on due diligence, technology due diligence for all of our licensing deals globally for NBC, Universal, both film and TV content. As well as that, we're looking very much at the supply chain workflow, seeing how we can simplify that, and as we move and slightly change our business models going forward, that becomes a real focus for us. And then finally, what we're all here for today, really, and around device security, content protection. You know, as some of you might know, that we've been experimenting with early Windows over the last 6 months as well, which we'll probably get into a little bit of detail about, hopefully, as we go through this session. So device security has come really top of the list for us as a studio, and how we can work with the industry to try and get things better as we move forward, and see how we can help out with that.
Okay, so I'm going to start with you. I do have quite a few questions on my side for you guys, if that's okay. So you mentioned that you have been experimenting with early window releases. So it's been going on for 6 months. So how has that shaped your view on device security and content protection in general? And have you got any stories, good or bad, to share?
Well, it's certainly been a whirlwind for the last 6 months. You know, we launched what we call PVOD, Premium Video on Demand, with sort of 10 days notice. So it was all a little bit crazy. But what we've learned going through the last 6 months, with I think it's around 8 or 9 titles altogether that we've launched in various different territories at various different times, is around content security, and how pirate groups in particular are taking advantage of known vulnerabilities in devices, or maybe protection systems, or even unknown ones as well, and seeing how quickly that our content is replicated and put up on pirate sites is quite staggering, to be honest with you. So really, the first month I had my jaw open. For the next 5 months, I've been very much working with a lot of people, vendors, industry participants, studios, content providers, everyone really, just to start conversations around how we can improve this going forward. And really, some of that work has already been ignited in the CDSA, which I think we'll talk a little bit about a little bit later as well, where the conversation has got starting to get the right vendors in place, and where we feel that over the next couple of years, because this is not a quick process, as everyone knows, this is going to take a while to get everyone invested into trying to make sure that we come up with a plan to try and make this whole ecosystem more secure than it currently is today.
No, that's great. So Mark, so I've got a quick question for you. So, you know, similar to Andy, you have been looking at content and device security as well. So what have you seen, and what sort of vulnerabilities or classes of attacks that you have seen that is worrying you, and what are you doing about it?
Yeah, that's the one that's keeping me up at night. In terms of observations, I would say that attackers are getting pretty savvy in the tool chains that they're developing, and you know, the attacks that are being performed are actually probably on older devices. So now that we've got a bit more of a stable digital ecosystem, you know, where we see consumer behavior to purchase new devices every 2 to 3 years. It's those devices that are now in that 4 or 5 year mark. Remember, the iPhone's only 11 years old, right? So we've got, you know, a handful of cycles in there of older devices, and really 1080p on devices has only really been in the last, you know, 3, 4 years, 5 years max. So those are the devices that are actually starting to get attacked a little bit more, and people are savvy, right? They are looking at the critical vulnerabilities that are published. They take a look and see, do OEMs act on that and publish out firmware updates, and then do consumers update their hardware that's 4 or 5 years old? They may not be doing that, and so that's an area that I think is currently being attacked. But as we look to the future and where we want to see devices being made so we don't have that problem, I think that's where Diane's brought up the concept that multi-tenant environment becomes really, really important to look at as the future vehicle to help address this current pattern of behavior.
Okay, so you mentioned Diane's group in terms of addressing this challenge in multi-tenancy. So Scott, so the question to you is, I mean, this sounds like a multi-dimensional problem. So how would you see the industry coming together? So Dianne mentioned SOC vendors, ODMs, CA vendors, DIM vendors, and also TV operators. Can you just give a bit of your thought as to how and at what level and at how many levels we need to tackle this?
Yeah, and that is part of the challenge, right? Is there are multiple stakeholders in the ecosystem, and we're moving into a new kind of application with streaming on set-top boxes, for example, or streaming into mobile phones, or downloaded content, playback on mobile phones. And as we enter this space, there are no standards in place as of yet, and we know that coming together and creating standards takes many years. We don't have time to wait for this. We're trying to build a business today. So we have to find our common interests, even those of us who are competing in this space, and we have to find efficient ways to communicate between stakeholders and solve some of the underlying problems. Virtualization of security capabilities, and this ignores all of the operational capabilities that we need to virtualize just to have playback and recording and different things going on at the same time. But virtualizing security features like identity, content protection. In the case of mobile, there's financial implications and payment applications. Figuring out what the underlying the various strata at the different layers need to look like and who's responsible for that, and then finding ways to communicate and get people on the same page and get agreement without standards organizations is really challenging. But that's why we're here today.
So just for the benefit of everyone, I am actually one of the few who actually watched Diane's keynote. So just a quick recap. So Dianne was talking about the need for a secure root of trust so that you can continue to do things like, how do you do device recovery? Because devices are in the field for such a long time. How do you recover it back to a good state, especially for older devices? And then there is how do you have an agreement between the different stakeholders that you talked about in terms of how do you provision your certificates, your private keys in order to anchor your service? So that's another one. And then there is, now that you've got different stakeholders all needing the security infrastructure, as you say, and from my perspective, whenever you are talking about multi-tenancy, especially about video playback, to me, that essentially complicated the SOC design problem by an order of magnitude. Because when we think about it, if we have got multiple video streams playing at the same time, then you need to virtualize the VPU so it can be used to handle different streams. You then need to consider how do you have mutual distrust between different components in the pipeline, because now it's an order of magnitude more complex. So it's a challenge that I'm really interested in solving as well. So Dianne also mentioned a bit about when you've got different video providers looking at different policies being enforced, what do you think could be needed in terms of at the DRM layer? What do you think that could be in terms of making this easier to manage?
Yeah, so you have to look at how do we, the different service providers, vary in terms of the features we're offering. And some examples related to secure video pipeline or secure media pipeline are around things like, do you want to apply watermarking? And if so, what type? Do you want to be able to record the content? Do you want to be able to transcode the content and send it to another device? Not all providers want to enable all of these features. So you have to have a way to securely signal whether these features should be enabled or not for a specific stream. And the platform needs to provide interfaces which the recipient of that signal in the system can use to indicate what the policy is for that stream. So one way you can do this in OTT with DRM providers is you can provide policy signaling in the DRM, so in the content license, for example, so that it's securely transmitted into the DRM application. And then the platform has to provide some way for that DRM application to signal to the device whether to enable or disable the different features. So this is one of the challenges we're working on right now, because there are multiple DRM providers, there are multiple SOC vendors, and as OTT and other applications, IPTV, internet-based content applications have been implemented in devices, the entire industry has been gradually discovering how you do this. So when we first said you should have a trusted execution environment and implement a secure video pipeline, SOC vendors, we all looked at each other and said, okay, how do you do that? Nobody knows. It's not a standard thing that's been done before. So the first problem was in understanding how to implement that. The second problem now, the next level, is in understanding how to virtualize that and share it between stakeholders who may have divergent requirements for those streams.
Okay, thank you, Scott. So I'm going to open the panel to an audience question. So it's from Sam Pumphrey. The digital media ecosystem was trailblazing security technology for decades in the 80s to the early 2000s, and presumably is still at the forefront. What does the panel see as the biggest security challenges you are facing today, and what new technology is emerging to deal with those challenges? Who wants to go first? Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, why not? Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I think sort of from the 80s and 90s, I think the ecosystem was much more closed. Today, we've got such a proliferation of devices, SOCs, vendors, third parties, OEMs, that we could have never have foreseen in the 80s and 90s. So I personally think that going back to that time, I think there were a finite number of areas that a content provider, for example, needed to get involved with to try and at least get an understanding and work through all of the details of how an ecosystem was protected. Whereas today, and certainly for the last 5 years, and I think it gains more momentum every single year or every single month, you know, there are so many different players in the marketplace, whether it be protection systems, whether it be device manufacturers, and the internet has spawned all of this. Whereas we're no longer just thinking about broadcast networks. It's a lot of these, not necessarily say problems, but challenges are coming from internet devices and how we secure all of those devices that come out and the public are quite happy to buy every 2 or 3 years, and how we continue to do that in the future and try and work with either the manufacturers of those devices and also everyone that is involved with those devices as well, and content protection. So I think it's a much bigger challenge that we're up against than we were a couple of decades ago.
Yeah, that's great. Anyone else got anything to add? Okay. Yeah, Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, I would add, and you mentioned this already, Michael, the idea of recovery. It sounds like not that big of a problem until you recognize that in a system where there are multiple different applications or tenants, there are multiple security relevant components in the system. And any one of those components may have a vulnerability that needs to be remediated. How do you identify these components in a standard way, and how can someone query the system to understand whether a vulnerable component is in the system or whether it's been remediated? There's this, there is some movement in the industry. Google's working on adding attestation functionality to their systems, and but again, there are multiple stakeholders that have to participate in this, and a lot of things have to come together to make it work, to agree about how do you represent a component, what does the label look like, what's a version, what's the right format for that, how do I create a component manifest for a device that shows all of the components and their versions that an external party can interpret and verify and understand. It's this kind of a huge problem. I mean, right now, we're just depending on specific players, SLC vendors, maybe integrators and OTT providers, working with them to do the best we can, but we don't have a complete solution.
Yeah, so I would just add one thing here, which is that the common theme that's coming out from what everyone's saying is that there's this fragmentation. There is this very diverse stakeholders. So I'm going to sort of ask you, Mark and Dianne, do you know of any, are we working on an industry forum where we can have a common language, a common description to communicate these problems to the industry better so that we can better come together? How do you see that working?
Do you want to take that one, Mark?
Sure. So it's interesting that you bring that up, Michael. There is an association that several of us are a part of, the Content Delivery Security Association, CDSA for short. And it has become a forum for a variety of, the content owners, the distribution platforms, and the device manufacturers to really start having these conversations, right? It's very difficult to have these conversations. We don't want to create another standards organization for a variety of reasons that Scott's already talked about. We want to leverage the existing platforms that we have, and this one is a safe one. We are safe from an antitrust perspective. We're not talking about prices or market shares. We're really trying to solve industry problems, and so that's been a really good place for people to be able to have that conversation, or at least start the conversation to understand what those impacts are, what the problems are, and the solutions. Dianne, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I think both Disney and Netflix have been really excited about working with CDSA, and I think NBCU as well. And CDSA is providing us with this ability to be able to talk through challenges, be able to talk through how our biggest responsibility here is to be able to provide video content and a great user experience to all of our subscribers and still have that be secure, right? And so I think that having this common language, having the ability to be able to do some education in CDSA so that we are all using the same terms, we're all talking about the same things, and we all know what we mean when we talk about provisioning or around device identity or around the challenges of recoverability. I think it's a really great place for us to have that conversation, and I'm excited about having them engaged with us as well for continuing this industry collaboration conversation too.
Yeah, so I'll just put the pitch out. If there's anybody who would like to learn more about the organization, feel free to ping myself, Dianne, Andy, Scott. We'd be happy to connect you with the right people. I'll also be adding Guy Finley's contact information from the CDSA at the end of the slide, at the end of the presentation.
Thank you. So one of the things that I'm really interested in also participating and contributing from ARM's perspective, we're really keen to also approach this, well, firstly, this secure root of trust problem. Because when you break it down to some of the industry problems that Dianne mentioned, which is how do you do recoverability? So that almost assumes that you have got a root of trust, which you can then bootstrap to update firmware securely. And we are really keen to see how we can contribute to that conversation as to what does that root of trust need to defend against, and what kind of cryptographic primitives needs to be there to allow provisioning. So yeah, we are more than happy to contribute to that. So that's a conversation that we very much like to join. So I'm really sorry, but we are running out of time we are coming up to the half-hour mark. So I just wanted to see, I just want to sort of, it's been a great discussion. Thank you so much for your time. I'm going to invite all of you to just put a few closing remarks for the attendee, and also for people watching this recording after the session. So Dianne, do you have any closing remarks on how we can better collaborate?
Yeah, I think I'm looking forward to the final slide that we're going to put up here that talks to all of you about how you can keep talking to us. I think one of the big challenges we face in having a virtual conference like this is that we don't get to have those hallway conversations at the end, and we don't get to have that ability for us to engage with all of you directly. And so being able to continue the conversation through CDSA and through the means that they provide by reaching out to Guy Finley is something I'm super excited about, because I want to make sure that we don't just put the problems out there and then walk away and not engage all of you who have some great ideas towards solving this. So thank you. I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you. Scott? You're on mute. I'm sorry.
Oh,
that
sorry.
was
almost made it all the way through.
Okay, it had to be me. Yeah, so the only thing I would add is that, you know, we've been working with ARM for many years now on a lot of these problems, and obviously people who are attending this session are also working with ARM, and I would encourage you to, in addition to CDSA, communicate with Michael about what you need, and if you have questions, or communicate with any of us. I think that all of us together can move this along relatively quickly if we're communicating.
Yeah. Mark?
Thank you to my fellow panelists. I'd probably close with, look, the rate of innovation is happening faster now than it was back in the 80s and the 90s in digital media. That means the rate of innovation, not just in products, but in solutions to protect those products and make it a fantastic customer experience, are more important now than ever. So that means we need the exchange of ideas and cooperation of everybody to really make that happen in a meaningful way for the consumers. Because at the end of the day, it really is, certainly from Disney's perspective, it is that consumer that is most important to us, and the experience that they have, that connection that they have.
Andy?
Yes, I think one of the main things for me is that, as organizations, we're all used to going to speak to the vendors, to the content protection companies, CA vendors, DRM vendors. We all go and do this day after day, all on our own. And actually now, as we've all said, we're moving forward so quickly with innovation and technology. Having everyone sort of working together and trying to build a better content protection future for all of us going forward, which everyone is aware of and knows what's happening, is a great thing. And I just hope everyone can get involved and look forward to having those conversations ongoing.
Indeed. I just wanted to say thank you again, and thank you so much for your time, Dianne, Scott, Mark, Andy. Really do appreciate it. And to everyone watching, good evening, good day, and we look forward to speaking with you soon. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.